All right, 3, 2, 1.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on a Friday. My name is Michael Dudley. I've got my buddy Craig Newert with me here. Craig, say hello.
Glad everyone's here to hear some enjoying information about Miruken.
Yeah. So, title of our presentation is Miruken Handles Your Application. Miruken is something that I've been working with for about the last 6 years. But Craig here started it back in 2007, was kind of the first ideas of Miruken. And Craig, what was that? Your inspiration came from some kind of a obscure technology. Well, not the name, but the inspiration for the whole thing.
Yeah, there was something in Java that kind of sparked the this pattern. You know, there was a security component in Java that is almost hardly ever used, but for whatever reason sparked something in my mind, and you know, that's what triggered 8, 13 years, 14 years of this.
That's awesome. So yeah, 2007, you wrote the first ideas in .NET using WinForms. And then in 2012, got a job programming on an iPhone application, and so you ported it to Objective-C. And then as that was winding down, you're like, what would this look like in JavaScript? And so you ported it over to ECMAScript 5. And that kind of brings us to the 2015 timeframe when I joined you. And it was a cold January morning, and we were tucked in away. It was like 7 a.m. Well, it was more like 6:30 because you get in early. And I showed up really early that day, walk in, and we're talking about this new project that we're starting. And you were like, hey, I've got this framework. And so what do you think? And it was Miruken, but it was in JavaScript at the time. And that's when Miruken-JS really started to take off. And we used it on that project, and I was enamored. It was awesome. At first I kind of scratched my head going, why would we write software this way? But then I saw it solve problem after problem after problem, and I wrote this kind of proof of concept that was like, hey, Craig, here's how we can do this. And it was we were doing Angular. And once we brought Miruken in, Craig just started deleting code. He was like, we don't need that, we don't need that, we don't need that. And code just started to fall away. And so then I was like, oh, okay. So this really does have huge benefit to us. Then CE6 compacted JavaScript, .NET, that compact edition. That was a weird little project, but we ported it over there. And the beauty of that was that it inspired Miruken.NET. So coming full circle, almost 10 years later, back around to the .NET language, we started doing MediatR pattern type stuff. Then we were on to Android in 2018, so we ported Miruken to, I say we, I use we lightly, Craig ported Miruken over to Kotlin, and then I got to be a part of that. And then, currently he's back around to JavaScript and using all the latest and greatest tools that JavaScript has given us over the last couple of years. So, but where we want to start today, we're going to be doing a lot of .NET code, latest .NET code. So it's going to be .NET 5, using the C#9 syntax, some really fun stuff. So Craig, why Miruken? Like, why even go through all of this?
Well, as you just presented, that slide showing the evolution, as contractors, we're having to deal with numerous disconnected, disjoint technologies. JavaScript is arguably an untyped system, although you can create beautiful typed language with it. Objective-C is a dynamic, loosely typed language. So, my background in the open source started with the Castle project in 2004. I was one of the original members of that team, and fantastic project. Dependency Injection was amazing. But as I left the comfort of .NET and approached things like Objective-C and iOS, those types of technologies didn't work. There was no dependency injection or anything close to that in Objective-C or JavaScript of any meaningful nature. So I had to just come up with a few abstractions that really allowed this framework to work in any language. And that's really why I keep pursuing this framework, because I can switch from JavaScript to .NET to Windows CE to Kotlin, and it's the same programming experience. So
you mentioned abstraction. Tell us about your abstraction.
Well, I am sure that every programmer out there has seen the concept of a handler. You know, in every language and every technology, whether it be messaging, event-driven, there's always this little handler thing that just kind of gets some kind of object and moves on. That is our abstraction. That abstraction somehow seemed to be the most fundamental way of creating a system with zero friction, except it needed a few changes. So this is our typical handler pattern, but unfortunately, it's not quite enough to do what we want to do. It doesn't take much more, but it takes a little bit more. Now we have what you'll recognize as a pure compositional decorator pattern. You know, back in the day of the Gang of Four, you know, we abused these patterns, but you know, one of those patterns that just got pushed under the rug was the decorator pattern, and probably because it wasn't really ever implemented right. You know, if you're not familiar with the decorator pattern, it's really just kind of a filter on top of some invocation. But without this little second parameter of itself, you really can't create much power in this pattern. So this is our one abstraction in Miruken, which drives UIs, security, validation, everything.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's jump in. Enough of the slides. Let's do a demo, because it's all words until we actually see some of these things running. So let me reset my demo here. All right. So was I on the right? Let's see. Yeah, hello world, good status. So everything's clean. All right, so we're going to be demoing .NET. So this is Miruken-.NET, and let me show you where this code is coming from before we really get going here. So Miruken-.NET is the repo where all our .NET code is on GitHub, and we are currently in the demo.hello world. So this is where all this is coming from, and there are branches. You know, if you want to pull this down, there are branches here. Oh, that's why I'm on the wrong one. Okay, demo.hello world. Here we go. Much better. Okay, so there are branches here: demo 1, demo 2, demo 3, demo 4. So if you want to come back to it and follow along, you can. So I'm using Rider. This is my really just recently switched over to Rider, doing .NET development over on the Mac side, and it's a really great experience. So we have a Hello World application here, and we're bringing in NuGet packages, Miruken, and the 5.0 version, and those are out there on NuGet.org. So you can come out here. See, here's Miruken 5.0. I was pretty excited. We're almost to 250,000 downloads, so that's pretty awesome. Just to see how much Miruken has been used over time. And this is the 5.0 version, so we've been working on it for a little while. We pushed it out. It's .NET Core. It's the newest stuff, right? The 5.0 release of .NET, and runs on the Windows side, runs on the Linux side, runs on the Mac side. .NET's, man, they've come a long way. So anyway, let's write some code. As the I handle implies, this is messaging based, right? So this is not as much interfaces with implementations as it is messages and message handlers. So for classic Hello World demo, we want to just say hello. So this is a message. It's just a class, and we're going to create a handler. And this handler, it's just a class, as we can see here. And the thing that makes the magic work is this attribute right here that says handles. That comes from Miruken. And it used to be, in a lot of frameworks, like you'll implement interfaces with typing and stuff, and it's based on the class. Miruken and its ability to do dependency injection can actually inject things right on the method level. And so and the interesting thing is the type system now is so good that we don't even need all the generics and stuff anymore. So we have all the metadata that we need here. This handles says I handle some kind of a message, and the message that I handle is right there. It's that first parameter that I take. I handle the say hello message. And so for this very simple demo, all we're going to do is write hello world out to the console line. This is a console application. So we need to give Miruken just a little bit of information. Whoops, because Miruken is it's a framework, right? It's not just a library. So Craig, the difference between a library and a framework is, as you always say, the Hollywood principle.
Well, that comes from the dependency injection concept. It's the principle that separates an API from a framework, such that if you're doing API-driven work, you see it in your code everywhere. So you may have 2-3 lines of actual business logic and 50 lines of database security, validation, error handling, all that stuff. When you shift to the framework model, you see nothing in your class but the business. Yeah. And that's what Miruken achieves.
Yeah, and the framework then is responsible for actually calling and executing. So we configure Miruken here. We take a service collection, which is a .NET object, comes out of well, I say .NET, it's Microsoft. Their dependency injection library stuff that's real popular now, just built in. So we take that service collection, we call add Miruken, and then we configure. And basically all we have to tell Miruken is, hey, where do you look? You're looking for your handlers and your objects that you need. We're just telling it to use the entry assembly right now because this is just a basic demo. And so we have handler.handle, and we pass in our message. And if everything goes right, which we'll see if the demo gods are smiling on us today. Hello world, there we go. So there's our output from our handler. Just wrote that to the console. So that's very simple, but it just shows you some of the basics of getting going. Our second demo here. Swap over to our second demo. We're going to do just a little bit more. Our second demo, if we go look, we still have our message, but you see our message is a little bit different now. We're not only saying hello, but we want to return a result. So we're going to return a speech result. We added the iRequest interface on here, which basically just says this is a request that returns a result. You don't have to have iRequest on there. You can do it without it. It requires a bit of casting when you get the result. So it's nice and handy to be able to throw that on there. So we're going to say hello. We're going to return a speech result, and that speech result is going to have a string that is the speech. And you'll notice this is a record. So this is new in C# 9. Just like C# just keeps getting better and better as far as sugar. It's starting to feel more like, having lived in the Kotlin world for a little bit, it's starting to feel a little more like Kotlin, like they brought some of those beautiful language features over from Kotlin. So this is just minimal. It's a record that takes this string, but that string then becomes available for a property, and I don't even have to define the property on here with a getter or setter. So that's just some of the nice new C# syntax there. And so our handler now is not just going to console.writeLine, but it's actually going to return a speech result that says hello world. And when we execute that, we already talked about how to configure Miruken. None of that has changed. But what we are going to do now, so instead of just handling it, we're actually we're gonna use the send method, which is an extension method off of our handler. It's going to send the message, and it understands that it understands the I request, right? So it can hand you back the typed results without having to do any casting. So that's pretty powerful. It's also asynchronous by default. So when we call send, this is async and await. So it deals with synchronous and asynchronous handlers. So you'll notice our handler over here is not doing anything synchronous, asynchronous, right? This is all synchronous, but we could have a synchronous or asynchronous handler, and the send method here knows how to do both, right? So when we execute this, we see our hello world coming through again, but instead of just being printed to the console inside the handler, now it's being sent back as an object. It gives us a lot, actually not just a little, it gives us a heck of a lot more power. We'll jump to demo 3, because there's so much more that we want to be able to do. We're going to introduce a language concept. So I have this iLanguage interface, and the language, what that brings to the table is just the ability to translate. So instead of just saying hello, now we're going to translate our hello into a different language. And I'm in Texas, specifically I'm in Dallas, Texas, and one of the popular second languages around here is Spanish. And so I speak a little bit of Spanish, enough to translate hello world into hola mundo. And so this translate implementation here is just going to take a string, translate it for us. Our message and our result hasn't changed, but in our handler now, we start to see some interesting things, especially from the dependency injection point of view. So as I mentioned before, dependency injection is on the method here. So a lot of times you'll inject things into the class level through the constructor, and while we can certainly do that, we're relying here on method level injection, and we're saying, give me an I language, and this language is optional. If you have one in your context, Miruken is highly contextual. If you have one in your context, it'll give it to you, and if not, then it won't. So our hello world, we're going to run through our language translator, and we're using the nice features of C# here to just handle null. So, if language is not null, then we're going to call the translate method on there. If it is null, then we're just going to use the phrase, some null coalescing stuff here, and then we're going to return a speech result. And if we execute this, so if all we do is just say hello, we don't have any language in our context yet at this point. So we should still just get hello world. But now we start to see some of the interesting power of Miruken. So on my handler that we've been using before, I use this with keyword, and that's just adding things to our context, because Miruken is contextual. It's saying, hey, with this language object in my context, now send hello world, and then write the results out. And so we see that first execution, which didn't have language, we got hello world. And then the second one, where we started to pass in Spanish, now we have our translated message of hello world there. So pretty interesting stuff, really, when you start to think about having a context and be able to change the context over time. You do that a little bit with APIs. You do that a whole lot with UIs. And so, once Miruken has an MVC component that we're not going to be demoing too much today, but you use that contextual nature so much when a user is actually interacting with an application. the state changes, the context changes, and we're able to handle some really, really complex scenarios there. So our fourth demo, come back through here, and we're introducing a new message. So now not only can we say hello, but we can exchange pleasantries. You know, hi, how are you? Nice to see you, things like that. And so our Spanish has our Spanish language has a few more things. Nice to see you, how are you? It can translate for us. And inside of our speech handler, so this first method, which we've seen before, right? It handles our say hello. Well, now that we have a new message, we need to handle that as well. So we just create a new method here, the handles attribute on the top of it. And what this method is going to handle exchanging pleasantries. And you know, we want to be able to translate that as well. So we still take an optional language. It'll get injected in when it gets called by Miruken. And so our pleasantries just have an array of pleasantries, and we're going to use the random features inside of .NET to grab a random pleasantry. And then if a language is there, we're going to translate it and return our speech result. So let's run through that. We come over here. We'll run it through. Let's start up here. Go ahead and comment that guy out. Say hello should still work just like we normally expect it to. So we'll run that just to make sure we haven't done anything to mess that up. We should still see hello world. Yep. So hello world works just like we'd expect it to. Let's look at our new functionality that we created. Oh man, my Vim skills. That's weird. There we go. The Vim integration kind of messed with me for a second there. So let's send our exchange pleasantry. How are you? Prove that it's random here. How are you? Come on, give us a nice to see you. There we go, nice to see you. Okay, so it's bringing us back a random pleasantry. What we want to begin to do is look at, you know, what's the benefit of having this composer over here? So Craig made the claim earlier that having the composer at the end actually, let me go back to that for a second just so you can see. The perfect interface not only has the message that you're trying to handle, but also the composer so that you can continue to do more things with it. So the message that we can handle is say hello. Optionally, if you have it, you know, give us the language and then the composer so that we can continue that chain on down to do different things. So what we're going to do is, you know, not just say hello world, but we're going to, within the say hello handler, we're going to send out another message using the composer to exchange pleasantry. And so that's either going to send us back how are you or nice to see you. And so now, instead of just returning our speech, we're gonna take the speech, we're gonna add a new line, and then we're gonna put our pleasantry onto the end of that. So let's see what happens when we run this. Go back over to our program and make sure that still works. Hello world, nice to see you. So now we have our pleasantry added onto the end of it. And if we throw Spanish into the mix, what we would hope to see is that same thing, but translated into Spanish. There we go. So now it's Hola Mundo, which is hello world, and mucho gusto, which is nice to see you. Let me check something real quick. Yeah, okay, cool. So interestingly, because this is contextual, it's like what would happen if we change the context along the way? So what I want to do, let's add another language inside of here. Let's take our Spanish translations. Let's add a new one. So we'll add French. And we'll change this to French. And unfortunately, I don't actually speak French. So what we're just going to say here is I'm in French. I don't think I mentioned that. I wanted to mention that. We're using some of the new C# syntax here from C# 9. This is a switch statement that is actually just an expression. So we pass in the phrase. This is telling it to switch on that phrase and then just return whatever matches. And the underscore is the default. Hey, if I don't match anything else, go ahead and just use that for the default. So it's going to say I'm in French. And just having the French available right now doesn't really do anything for us, right? We run it, we're still in Spanish. But the contextual nature of it, so what happens if inside of my handler, before I send this pleasantry off, what if I call with, and now I put French into my context? Oh, I got to new that up. New French. Cool. So whatever language that's currently in context is going to come in. We'll do our translation. But now when I go send my pleasantry off, I've actually changed our context to do something different, in this case, French. And let's run that and see what happens. Nice. So the first part came through in Spanish. I changed our context to add French to the context, and forwarded things on with the composer to do another handler, and now we come back in French. And what's really fascinating about this is that it's all contextual. So if I go ahead and put my first call back in here, this first one has no concept of language, right? So it's just should just say hello world and have a nice pleasantry there. Oh, actually, it went through and said hello world because we didn't pass in a language. But within the context, along the way, we injected French in. And so we switched down there, which begins to show part of the ability to compose these things. And lastly, if we just ask it to exchange a pleasantry, we'll run that. This last one has no concept of language right at this point. And so it just gives us the default, which is English. Nice to see you, untranslated. So that's a hello world. That's just a real quick intro into beginning to use. Well, let's go look. Say hello. Beginning to use messages, which represent the functionality of our application. Responses coming back from that, and then now using the handler.send, which is right here, something like that, right? Handler.send to handle our message, get back a response. Craig, I've just done a lot of talking. Is there anything that you want to interject into that while I switch over to our more advanced demo?
Yeah, I guess just briefly, we are focusing on the messaging side, but Miruken does support your traditional interface-driven model if you do choose to use it. Nowadays, everything's kind of pushed in the area of messaging with gRPC and just microservices, so that's kind of dominated. But it does support full interface, communication as well.
Okay. Cool. Well, that gets hello world out of the way, right? So that's just the basic getting us up and going, demo. But obviously, we want more, right? We want to write something that's a little more full-featured. Craig's a big fan of soccer, and so all of his applications in all his tests and things, you always end up seeing soccer stuff in there. And so that's where Major League Miruken comes in. The domain here represents soccer a team, a coach, a manager, players, things like that. And this is also out on GitHub. It's demo.majorleaguemiruken. So we'll swap over to that demo. Sorry, Teams was pinging me. I just switched over to see if that was actually important or not, but it's not. Okay, so let's switch over to our Major League Miruken. Close all tabs, and we'll make sure that we are actually on demo 1. Cool, I am on demo 1. Everything is clean. So this project, so that Hello World was just a console application, right? We were doing just everything right in line. Does not really look like what we would do in a real world scenario. This application actually looks like a very real world scenario. In fact, we have lots of code running in production that is organized and kind of architected this way. So this is another solution. And you'll notice I've got 3 projects in here starting out. We like to have this concept of an API assembly. And in this particular project, it's just a library, a class library, and we want the minimal things that define the API. How do I interact with my application? We bring in Miruken 5.0 just like we did before, and really we try to keep the references very, very minimal. So what we want this to be, like data classes, messages, responses. And so this demo 1 focuses just on the person. So we have a person data object. It's using for this demo, we're using the new record type, because those are really powerful. They allow us to actually define in very small, very succinct, not much code at all, the structure of our data. So this person has an ID, first name, last name, and birth date. And just something that we found very helpful, especially when we're building like API-driven things that are going to be done through the web and HTTP. Having everything that comes into these data objects be nullable. So time is nullable. It gives us a lot of power when we actually go to interact with the API. And I'll show you a little bit of that here in a second. But this is much more full-featured. We have our create person message that just takes person data, returns a person result. And so these are just the CRUD operations. If you wanted to delete our person, you would send a delete people message. We can update our person. The result objects, so person result has person data. Not a whole lot here, right? So these are just very basic classes that define the things that we want to do inside the application, the data that's going in, the data that's coming out, and that's pretty much all that you want in your API assembly. Now we have our Major League Miruken, and a lot of times we'll use this exact naming, right? So whatever the thing that we're trying to solve is, maybe we're trying to solve restaurant menus, and so you would have a menu API, and then you would have a menu library that actually did the work, all right? So this is Major League Miruken. It is the thing that has the business logic that then we want to be able to share across all our applications. So we have our person handler, and the person handler is just coming through and handling all those messages that we created over in the API. This demo doesn't have a database or anything. We're just using a dictionary to hold all our data. Miruken does have really good support for entity framework and databases, and we want to expand our demo. That's on my to-do list in the future, is to actually expand this out a little bit to really use entity framework in a real database. But for now, we just have a dictionary, and we're handling finding our people, creating a person, updating a person, deleting a person, and then filtering to find the people that we're asking for through the API. So I'm not going to go too deep into the implementation here. Just what we wanted to show is just a more complete example and get into some of the power. So because we're not doing that direct call, right? We're not calling just an API per se with our application. We're actually using the framework and the messaging. We can start to get into some really powerful things. Validation, for example. So Miruken has huge support for validation, just using Fluent. This example uses Fluent validation. So when, for example, when we want to create a person, this validator comes in for that create person message, and it makes sure that the person's not null. The ID has to be null because it's the backend that's responsible for assigning that ID. But you have to have a first name, you have to have a last name, you have to have a birth date, and that birth date has to be valid. You can't be born in the future. So we have validation around all of that kind of thing. So this is the API that we're dealing with here. And what I really wanted to show, and this is where a lot of the power starts to come in, is the integrations. Because all we've really had to define is our messages and our handlers, and we're not tied to a console application or a web application or a Windows service or like MassTransit or NServiceBus. Like, it's literally separated, and that's part of what the framework does, is it separates you from all those transport level things, and then it integrates them in to those transports. So this project, this Major League Miruken web host, is a web project that we're going to use to host our API, and the Miruken framework itself does most of the heavy lifting. So I created a new web project. This is what you would get pretty much out of the box with Rider if you create a new project. Inside of the program, we had this one line here for Miruken, which is setting up the service provider factory. Actually, let me show you. I want you to make sure you have full context here. Our packages, right? We're now bringing in the ASP.NET Core package. This is ASP.NET Core 5.0. And then the ASP.NET Core Swagger NuGet packages. So with those brought in, then we have the Miruken Service Provider Factory. And then over on Startup, which is pretty much just a boilerplate startup, adding MVC. This is stuff we usually add cores, cross-origin stuff right in there so that it can be accessed for multiple web applications. It's totally optional, but it's just depending on how many people you want to access your API, right? This is just default Swagger configuration here. The thing that's Miruken specific is line 32, which just says, hey, add Miruken to Swagger. And then this is the Miruken specific configuration, which looks almost exactly like it did over in our console application. On configuration, we add our public sources. But what's interesting now, and this is real. This is what it would look like in a real application, right? We've said, hey, go find the person handler and go look in that assembly for all the things that you care about, right? All the handlers and the validations and things like that. And so it's that line right there, line 36, that says, Miruken, all the public sources that you're looking for live in an assembly that contains the person handler, which we can see is right over here. And then the configure piece is just normal configuration, nothing Miruken specific down there. So I think at this point we should just hit the play button and see what happens. I'll let this build. All right. So this is Swagger. I don't know if you've played with Swagger very much, but Swagger is just a really nice front end on top of .NET MVC applications. You know, the API gives you a really nice user interface to see the documentation. And when Miruken integrates with Swagger, what it does is it goes and finds all these handlers that we've created. So this create person handler, I mean, you can even see where it lives. It's it goes and finds all the things that can be handled, right? So this right here, this create person method that handles create person results in create person showing up in the Swagger UI. So let's play with that a little bit. Let's try it out. Let's actually come in here and create a person. So when you try it out, it even goes ahead and just generates a generic payload for you. So if I execute this, I'm not going to modify it. I'm just going to execute it, and we'll start to see our API in action. We got back a 422 unprocessable entity. This is because we added validation. So our validator over here, our create person integrity, we like the word integrity. We usually, I mean, it could be named anything, but we always, because we want data integrity, we want to make sure that what we're getting is what we expect. So it's just running through all these rules and returning back the details of why it failed. So person ID must be empty. So I'm going to get rid of the person ID here. I'm going to execute, and now we got back a 200, and it returned us back our person data object with the ID of 1. So now we know that we created a person, we got back an ID of 1, and if we want to go find that, let's go find it. We'll use our find people handler. So find people maps to where's find people? There's update, create, there's find people. So the find people handler is going to handle this message right here. Try it out. And it gives us a filter. We can filter on many different things here. But what I want to filter on, I want to find the one that we just created. Execute. We got a 200 back, and this is the person that we just created here. But our person is pretty young. Let's make an older person so we can actually see an age that's a little older than that. So what we can do is go update our person. Click try it out. We want to update person 1. We don't want to change their name, first name or last name. We just want to change their birth date. And I don't know, let's make them born in the year 2000. Execute that. Internal server error. What did I do wrong? Invalid. Oh. Did I mess up the date format? What did I do wrong here, Craigie?
See, I think the middle one is the day. I think you got a month that's a little wrong. Maybe not. It's well, you should be able to see the error on your console. So let's why don't you bring up your, let's see. We didn't configure logging, that's why.
Oh, I didn't have logging. Oh, okay. Sorry, I strayed from my demo script. I don't want to. I've got a lot of other good things that I want to get to. I'll just chalk that up to a demo fail, and we'll move on past that. I'm going to jump to the second demo. Demo 2. All right. So, Jump demo 2. Okay, so now we're on demo 2. I'll close this. I'm going to stop running that. I have noticed that jumping around inside of Git sometimes will freak out. Right, even Writer, it doesn't freak out as much as Visual Studio used to when you change things underneath it, but it helps to do a rebuild solution whenever you're really changing the solution drastically. So now inside of our API, we not only have our person, but this is the full API, right? We've got teams and colors and coaches and all that kind of stuff in here. And what I really wanted to get to, and this is where some of the power starts to come in too, is that I've added a client, and this is a console client. If we come inside here, this starts to get into some of the, how can we easily call HTTP between applications, make HTTP calls between applications, because when you're starting to create these REST APIs and things like that, you end up with lots and lots of boilerplate code a lot of times, actually, writing out the URLs and stuff to access the get, the put, the post, all of those things. And you noticed, well, I'll show that in a second. I'll mention it here and then I'll show it once I pull up the UI. That everything that we've been doing right now has been a post, and that's just like out of the box, right? I didn't have to create controllers. I didn't have to do anything special. It was just the integration with ASP.NET allowed us to have an API that we could access over HTTP without creating controllers. You can still do that. You can still create your gets and your puts and your posts and deletes and things like that. But just out of the box, using posts, we get this really nice integration. And so that's what I want to show here. So this is a console application. And references, it references Miruken. It references Miruken.http. And those are the only two NuGet packages. I do have a project reference to the API. So because we're here in the same solution, I can just reference the project. A lot of times, depending on how many different applications need to interact together, if it's only one, we just leave it in the project. But if it's more than one separate application, we'll move this API library, we'll move it out to a NuGet package, and then we'll let them all reference the NuGet package. Then we'll have an internal NuGet server to the company that we're working for, and we can have those private NuGets there. And they can be shared and they can be versioned and all that kind of stuff. So what we have here, by this point, you've seen this Miruken configuration quite a bit. What we're doing here is we're just saying with HTTP. We're not adding public assemblies because this isn't actually handling anything locally. It's just gonna make requests. And so we're configuring Miruken for HTTP. We have our handler. We're going to send a create person. That's going to create a person for us. And this is the one thing that changes. And this is a decorator. So let's go back over here to our slides. This is why we love this so much. This interface, we're able to just decorate and decorate our messages. And so what this does is it decorates our create person message that we're going to execute with a route to. So this just says, hey, route this message over to our web host, and I've defined our web host up here. And let's see if it works. I'm going to switch this over to all so that when I hit the play button, it's going to spin up our web server, and then it's going to execute our console application there. Let me make sure I'm in a clean state here. All right. I'm going to rebuild.
You probably just want to run the web app first I think came up quick, so the client didn't get a chance to see it.
Is that what it is? So we'll see. When I practiced the demo, it was working just by hitting the button, but it might not. Okay, yeah, so it came up cleanly. I glossed over a little bit about this HTTP route earlier, and this is some of the stuff I wanted to show for a second. So by default, Miruken has the process tag and publish endpoints. That allows a lot of the stuff that we're doing now, where without having to write any kind of controllers, Miruken can communicate between API and clients that are calling it. So let's swap back over here. Let's look at the output for what we just wrote. Yep, so there's our output. We routed our create person message over to our web API, and we got back ID of 1. So that got created. And interestingly, I just thought this was interesting. So in the past, or what I initially wrote was result.id. This is just a little bit more magic and integration that we get with those records from C#9. So records know how to just do a toString and write their data out in a really nice format. So I just thought that was really cool. I didn't have to do anything to actually get the full structure there. So I thought that was neat. I'm having a lot of fun with C#9 and .NET 5. Anyway, let's go over to our UI here, and let's go find that person that we just created. And I know we're getting short on time here, so I'm gonna end this little demo after this part. So we were able to go find the user that we just created, because I want to jump to what I think is one of the really, really cool and powerful features of Miruken. We talk about composition, right? Having that composer in there and the ability to how much power that gives us. Because in that demo, let me go ahead and rebuild here before I forget. So in that demo, I created a single person. And the question then comes, well, what happens when I want to create more than one person? And we see this all the time when we're doing APIs. Like, we create these APIs and they do things individually and it's fast, but what if I want to do it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? Slow down, because you have the overhead of the call to the server and coming back, and all of a sudden I'm flooding my server with calls. So Miruken has this ability to batch calls, and this is just part of that beautiful way of composing these messages together. So instead of calling handler.send, I'm going to call handler.batch, and this allows me to define a batch operation. So I can batch.send, create person, I can route it to my web host, and then I can batch.send, creating a second person. I'm going to comment these 2 out for now, because those are a couple of special cases that I wanted to call attention to if we have time. But what a batch does is allows you to do all these individual things, and then, wait, where am I looking? I'm looking right here. Yeah, the await. So I'm going to wait this entire batch of operations, which means it's going to take all these messages, it's going to send them over to the server all at once, do the work, and then send me the responses back. And I want to point out, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. We've got about 5 minutes left. But I want to point out here, and we could do a whole hour just on asynchronous programming. But this actually will probably start to look a little bit like JavaScript to you, because JavaScript uses a lot of promises and stuff when it does its asynchronous work. And we love the promise abstraction so much, and it was Bluebird was actually the first real promise library that we really liked. Inspired Craig to implement the promise pattern inside of .NET. And this is a perfect example of, I want to go do a batch of things asynchronously, and when it comes back, I want the result of whatever that is within context, right? So I'm just using a promise here. I'm saying .then. So route this message over to the server. And then when it comes back, go ahead and just write the ID out to the console. So I'm going to run this. All right, so it created our two people, and it brought them back. There's our IDs. The last little piece I wanted to show is that the integration with validation and HTTP and all this kind of stuff, it all works together. Harry Seldon was actually born in like 47,000, but that's not even a valid date. So I have him being born in 2047, and which is not a valid person, right? He can't be born in the future. So if I execute this, we see, and the server's still running, right? So we already created two people. So this message created a third, this message created a fourth, and then we got our validation stuff coming back that's saying you can't be born in the future. So I'll stop there. Super excited about batching because this is a really hard problem to solve, and it's solved in a very, very clean way here. We've got like 3 minutes left, Craig. Is there anything that I haven't said that you're like, oh man, you should have said this?
No, I think you did a great job summarizing. We use HTTP as an example, but we support MassTransit. Any future transports that need to change. The code wouldn't change. You would just change your URL and the route to.
So that's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this was really, introduction to Miruken, hello world, and then a little bit more complex example. There are other pieces that we want to show in the future, right? We want to show our entity framework integration, so how Miruken helps you with databases. We want to show our MassTransit integration, so how Miruken helps you with message queues and all like that whole world, right? So we want to show MassTransit using Rabbit and all that kind of stuff because it integrates. We've got MVC. We didn't even get to show logging, so out of the box you get lots of just default logging. You get error handling, all sorts of really mapping, so just kind of auto-caching, all sorts of stuff that we can go into in the future. But Miruken.com is our website. This is it right here. You'll find that's where the timeline was. You'll find a little bit of documentation. You'll find links off to like our JavaScript implementations, Objective-C, Kotlin, things like that. And down at the bottom, a link to our GitHubs. So we have each GitHub, or each language gets its own dedicated GitHub repository. So everything that we've been doing today has been in the .NET, not the .NET world. So yeah, that's Miruken. We love it. We've dedicated lots of years to it, and the reason that we do it is because it makes our day-to-day job much easier as far as implementing these things with our clients. So I think that's it. It's almost 1 p.m. I want to thank you guys for joining us. I want to thank Craig for all the work that he does. He spends hours and hours making it happen, and I spend hours and hours talking about it and doing demos, and it's a good time. It's a good framework. You should dive in and see if it'll help you solve some of your problems. So thank you guys very much.
Appreciate it.